Now you can say something. We're going to be on our best behavior, lead by example, which means if you're sitting next to someone who's talking, you may need to raise your hand and move. All right? Make good choices. Be respectful. Let's do those things. And all you got to do is just be quiet. If you have some type of phone that plays music at a certain time, you may need to cut it off. Now, if you are removed from this presentation because of your behavior, you will have to come to Mr. Jones' office. And I don't really want to do that. But if you make me, I will. Now, when I say this, there's a famous poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller. Am I saying it? Niemöller, okay? And think about this. And it talks about if you see somebody being done wrong, what would you do? First, they came for the communists. I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. Because I was not a Jew, I did not speak out. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So if you see anybody being mistreated, speak up. Now I'm going to call, I'm telling you, let's be on our best behavior. This is being broadcast all over Alachua County. All you have to do is listen, and it may be time for you to ask questions as well. I don't know. All right, I'm going to call up Mr. Poyner. Give him a round of applause.
Well, let's see if I can make this work. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Y'all doing good?
Yes.
So if I look, I'm going to try not to be tired. Hopefully, I'm going to try not to talk too long because you guys are going to get to hear from a really amazing person. I'm here from the Holocaust Center, which is we are actually located in Maitland. We are one of the oldest Holocaust institutions in the state of Florida. We've been around since 1986. We're building a new building downtown in Orlando. But before we get to our guest, the actual guest of honor, Ms. Suzanne Schneider, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson, and I'll try not to make it too boring. Who here has ever heard of the Holocaust? All right. Very good. Most of you, when you learn about the Holocaust, most of us, when we're taught about the Holocaust, we learn about the camps. And you learn about the life in the camps and what it was like, and you learn about what happened during World War II. You know, these are some families here. This is before the war, before the Holocaust. These are Jewish families. Hitler and the Nazis would demonize the Jews to be viewed as something less than, that they looked a certain way, they acted a certain way. Yet most German Jewish families, you couldn't tell the difference between them and anybody else that was walking around you. But in 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed chancellor. If you don't know what a chancellor is, think of it in a way kind of like second in command, kind of like the vice president, but he had a little more authority and power. And there are reasons for that, and we're not going to get into a whole history lesson, but I'm going to kind of simplify it. Within a short amount of time, Hitler passes a boycott that lasts 2 days against the Jewish stores, Jewish-owned stores. The signs here say, Germans don't buy from Jews. They are what's wrong with our country today. They are the problem with our country today. Demonizing other people, just like, your principal was just saying, the idea, y'all heard, I equate it to someone saying something like, immigrants are stealing all of our jobs. Well, is that true? That's not, have people said that before? It's the idea of believe that one group is responsible for all your problems. This is called scapegoating. They were blaming Jews for all the problems that are happening in Germany, and what they did is pass these initial acts and these laws against Jews very early on. Jews can't be teachers. Jews can't be lawyers. Jews can't be in civil service. Don't shop at Jewish stores. But do you know, this only lasted about a day and a half. This boycott only lasted a day and a half because people said, I want to go to my store. You can't tell me where to go. You can't tell me where to buy from. and the boycott didn't last, proving that people could have stopped it. People could do something by using their voice to actually speak out against the Nazi German regime. Because you need the buy-in of the people in your country. You need people to be okay with what you're doing. At the very least, I need you to be quiet about it and not do anything. Everyone heard the term bystander before? It's like, you see something bad happen, and you sit by and you watch it happen, you think, I'm glad it's not me. That's a you problem, that's not a me problem. Now, I say it like that. Maybe you don't say it that harshly, but we've all thought it. That's happening to somebody that's not like me. You don't look like me. You're not my race. You're not my religion. You are nothing like me. I'm taking care of my own. More people in Germany fit that description than anything else. They sat by and watched it happen. What's the big deal? You can't shop at a Jewish store. That's not that big of a deal, right? Well, what about when you start passing out books? This was a children's book called The Poison Mushroom. And in this book, they'd give this out to children in schools, and they would teach you about the evils of being Jewish. That all Jews have this big nose, tight hair, wear a Magen David, the Star of David. They'd have this look on their face like this is the way. Do you think all Jewish people look like this? Jews are in control of all the banks of the world. They control all the money. If you're suffering, it's probably the fault of a Jew. This is the message that went out to most of Germany at the time in the early 1930s. I'm skipping over some stuff here, but in 1935, using as many bases, who here is familiar with Jim Crow laws? These are anti-black laws, and that will go back to build on ideas, because America was very successful. We were very successful at having race-based laws. So the Nazis created race-based laws. Who's a Jew? And we start looking at, now I'm not going to ask you to read, this is all in German here, but all the black dots mean you're Jewish. So if you have four grandparents or three or more grandparents that are Jewish, you're a Jew, full-blooded, like it or not. If you have one or more grandparents, 1 to 3 grandparents that are Jewish, you're Mischling. That's think of the term like half-breed, you're mixed. You might have a few more rights than somebody else for a little bit longer, but again, these are just laws that forbid you from, would determine if you were a citizen of the country or not. Can you fly the flag? You can only employ certain people. If you were a Jew, you can't employ a German. There are certain jobs you can have, certain jobs you cannot have, certain places you can be. Over here, with all the clear dots, it means you are a full-blooded German. You have all the protections and citizenship thereof. So then, if you see this bench here, you can't read this in German, it says, for Jews. This is a place for Jews, just for Jews. Look at her covering her face. Now, you've seen pictures like this in many of your classes, probably of seeing segregated water fountains during the Jim Crow era and even after. But these are segregated park benches. Now, does he look like he's uncomfortable in his seat? This is for Aryans. This is the idea of the master race. Is there a such thing as a master race? True that. That is true. There is no such thing as a master race, but Hitler and the Nazis would have you believe that genetically there was a superior and better race. And these were the Aryans. There's another history behind that you can feel free to get into later on, but imagine sitting on a park bench and being ashamed to be seen and photographed because you're Jewish. Much like our own miscegenation laws, this is like interracial marriage. They would make people walk down the street. She is supposedly a German lady, and she has basically ruined the German bloodline by marrying or being with a Jewish man. They would make them march down the streets where people would taunt them and laugh at them. You wouldn't dare say anything back, because if you said anything back, you'd possibly be arrested. And this is early on. This is before we start thinking of the camps. But being told that you are less than, you can't be with someone that you love because you're a Jew. Again, these laws draw parallels to things we've seen here in our own country. This brings us to what we're talking about today. This is Holocaust Education Week. Holocaust Education Week was chosen specifically because it falls on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, or as we now refer to it as the November Pogrom, P-O-G-R-O-M. P-O-G-R-O-M. I'm learning how to spell again, everyone. It's not program, a pogrom. It's an act of violence against Jewish people. Started in Tsarist Russia and made its way over. This is one of the largest violent acts against Jews that takes place November 9th and 10th of 1938. And what happens is a young man by the name of Herschel Greenspan, he's living in Paris. He finds out that his mother and his family have been deported. They've lost their lives, they lost their homes, everything they had, and they're being deported and pushed over the border. And he's angry, he's mad. And he goes to the consulate and he says, I want to speak to somebody. This gentleman comes down. His name is Ernst von Rath. Not much older then, he's a young guy. Herschel pulls out his gun and shoots him and says, this is for my family. Now, when he does this, in Germany, people launch into an uproar. And over the next 2 nights, a series of riots take place. And I say these riots, this was actually organized, this was planned out. They used this as a reason. Look at what the Jews do to us. Look at how they act. Look at how they behave. If we all stay silent and do nothing, they will kill us all. So over this next period of time, these next 2 days, let's see if I can make this work. Click, click, click. I'm learning how to use a clicker as well. I can't spell or click. But if you see, this is an article from the New York Times. Nazis smash, loot, and burn Jewish shops. What they don't tell you is that there are thousands of synagogues, places of worship that are destroyed. This is all over Germany. This is in Austria. This is in the Sudetenland area. Homes are destroyed. The Nazis gave specific orders to the police and the fire department. Make sure all non-German Jews are protected. Only German Jews are assaulted. Make sure all Germans are protected. Make sure to protect all German property. Everything else can burn to the ground and can be shattered. Synagogues are set on fire. Again, think of these think of this as like, your church. And these are just a few little quotes where people describe this situation as along the way, it appeared to me as the city was on fire. I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, if you came home and your house was destroyed like this, and you walked in, what do you think your parents would do? If they saw it destroyed like this, what would they do, probably? Who would they call? You'd hope they'd be able to call the police. Who does it look like's trash in this home? Who are you going to call? This is what they had no one to call. There was no one to look out for them. Sometimes this was your own neighbors who were doing this to your home. And this was, again, over 2 days. Fathers were arrested. People were taken out of their homes. And over 30,000 Jewish men were just arrested simply for being Jewish on this night. One story I've got is a gentleman who actually went out and his father was taken out of his home, and they would spray him down with a water hose and make him stand out in the freezing air and let the icicles freeze onto his body. This quote stuck out to me. This was the end of my school days, really. It was also the end of my family life, but I didn't realize it was the end of everything. This happened in a day. Imagine waking up today and everything's fine, or at least your life is the way you know it is, and then tomorrow it's not because of who you are, whatever that is, your race, religion, gender, etc. Any one of those things, you were then selected, and your life doesn't matter anymore. Who you are doesn't matter anymore, and you are now the target of this vitriolic hatred. And this is, again, just the beginning, what we start seeing. Everything I'm talking about has nothing to, we have not even gotten to the time of talking about camps or about mass murder. This is just a large act of violence. And this is where we're going to bring in Mrs. Schneider. Suzanne Schneider was born in Poland in 1937. I just showed you 1938, so a year earlier, she's born in a town that's really not part of Germany and did not experience all the exact same things that Germans experienced, but nevertheless fell under German control. Suzanne Schneider is she's a Holocaust survivor. She's lived through this. She's old enough to remember it. So I hope you'll give her your undivided attention, because that is me just setting the stage for her and what her family went through. Ms. Schneider? I may interject from the side, not because I'm being rude, just kind of I'm trying to help keep her, make sure that that I remember her story all right. And you start talking to the mic, and I'll.
All right. Very good.
And you gotta love this. Hold on.
Yeah, show them the
This
picture.
is her nice little picture of when she was. I'm gonna sit over here.
I was your age.
You gotta
I
talk in
look
the-
like that. Does this move?
No, you gotta talk. Yeah, here we go.
Okay, it looks like Mickey Mouse. Hello, everybody. Voila, this was when I was 10 years old, so it's much later. I'm going to start before that. I was born in Poland in 1937, and we lived in a very nice home. My mother was a teacher, and my father was a doctor in a small town in Poland. So we were a well-known family. Everybody knew my father. Of course, he was the type of doctor you don't see anymore nowadays. He used to do house calls, and he delivered babies. He was a family physician, and everybody in town knew my father. Anyway, pardon me? Oh, it's Barash. Yes, yes. Right there. It's right near a large city of Lvov. Okay, very good. All right, right there. Tarnopol is the largest city nearby. And again, we had a very nice, comfortable life. And then before we knew it, Russians came in. There was a split between Russia and Germany. They split Poland into two, Hitler-Stalin pact, and we were invaded. What are you showing?
This is split down the middle.
Right. This is part of it became, the western part became German, was given to Germany, and the eastern part was Poland, which is Russian, which is where we were. So we were actually invaded by Russians. What year was this? Because I was so young, I don't remember the dates. 1939. But everything was fine. We were in our house, and my father was able to practice his profession. And of course, I don't remember those days too well, but I do remember Russian officers eating dinner at our house. And then one day we realized that the Russians were escaping back to Russia, and Germans actually came in and came into our town. What year was this?
1941 in June.
1941, right. Okay, again, I don't clearly remember, but I do remember things that are still standing out in my mind. I'm still afraid of motorcycles with sidecars on them, because most of the Germans came in with the soldier driving the motorcycle and the officer, German officer, in the sidecar. And very clearly after that, there were what they called actions. They made people, they would let out an edict or a command to the town, and that handicapped people should all meet in the central square. So I had an aunt, my father's oldest sister, who was hunchbacked. And so she went with her husband, and we never saw them again. A lot of people showed up, and they were never seen again. And this went on every few weeks. There would be a different order. And one of the orders was for all the people, the educated people, professionals, to meet in the central square. And my father told my mother, you stay home, you don't go, and I'm going into the countryside to see my patients. We are not going to listen to the order. And as it turned out, I was the youngest of my generation. I had a lot of older cousins who were already professional, educated pharmacists, doctors. And there was one cousin who had just gotten married. He had just finished medical school. And he went, and a lot of other young people, and his sister, who was a pharmacist, also went with her husband, and they were never seen again. We never knew what happened to them. Anyway, a few months later, I remember very clearly, and I was about 4 years old, I guess, 3 years old, that my mother told me to go into another room, and a German soldier showed up in the house, and I went into the other room, and when I came out, my mother had a big gash on her head. She had been hit by a German because she had put all her jewelry sewn into a girdle, and she was wearing it, and they made her take off the girdle and just give it to them. And shortly after that, we were all told to just pack whatever things we could take with us, leave our house, and go to an area that was surrounded by wire, and it was called a ghetto.
We'll go to the next one. This is a picture of her town we actually just found. In here.
Small town. It was in a rural area of Poland, but there was a university there, and there were high schools there. So there were a lot of wonderful people, and a lot of people who were farmers as well. As I said, they were all patients of my father. He spoke Ukrainian, he spoke Russian, and he spoke Polish. So he was able to communicate with all his patients. This is what a ghetto looked like. This is not specifically the ghetto that we were in, but what it looked like.
This is close by.
Yeah. You see the wire surrounding, and people could not go in and out. We were lucky in the respect that because there were a lot of illnesses around and a lot of epidemics, my father was allowed to go in and out. He had permission to go out to see his patients. And did you ever hear of typhus? Anybody hear of it? Yeah, there was a big epidemic of typhus. A lot of people were getting sick because the sanitary facilities were practically non-existent. And we ended up with 2 other families in a one-room house. My parents and I, oh, by the way, I was an only child, and I'll tell you later why it was a good thing. My parents and I, there was a young woman who was a dentist, and she was pregnant. Her husband had been killed, and both her parents. And we were all in the same room together. That's where we lived. And then what happened was that they used to listen to trucks coming from the largest city, Tarnopol, which was right next to our town. And they knew that they were coming to catch the Jews, so we were all went into hiding places, and our attic was our hiding place. And the people who were living downstairs, and the fact that I was an older child, that I was about 4, I knew to be totally quiet. And there were no babies. If there had been babies in that house, we would have been discovered, because babies would be crying, and we would have been discovered. But we were able to survive this. And this went on and on and on. And finally, I remember that my father made arrangements with a former nanny of mine to take me out of the ghetto and keep me with her. And I remember she was sent to another town with me because, again, people knew my family, and my father was afraid that I would be recognized. So we went out to another town, and he paid her for that. And she had a little boy my age. And I remember waking up at night, I heard a lot of shooting going on, and I was throwing up from nerves because I was afraid that my parents were being shot at. And then one day, apparently, she wasn't happy living where she was, so she notified my father to take me back. And so I remember she brought me back into town in the middle of the night, and my father was sitting on a bench waiting. And also there was an older lady waiting there, and my father handed me to the older lady, and she took me with her. And that was her, and her name was Helena Sokalska, an older woman. And didn't know where she was taking me, but anyway, I ended up going with her. If you notice, she's wearing a cross. She was a Christian, and she was willing to protect me. And she takes me back to her little house, a little thatched, like a straw roof. And she, yeah, he'll show you the picture of that little cottage. And when she took me there was my mother. So needless to say, the joy of each other, finding each other, my mother was already taken there by my father a while before, and she was hiding there. That's the cottage that we were in. Right there was the front. It was a one-room cottage with attached to it was a chicken coop. And that's where we spent the day, in a chicken coop with the chickens on the shelves. And I had one of the chickens. I always had a pet, and one of the chickens became my pet. And I tell all the kids I speak to that the chickens are pretty smart, because I was able to train that chicken to respond to my commands. It would give me its paw and would come when I called it. So that was my companion as a child. I was 4. And my parents spent the whole day in the back. My father had made a curtain out of straw, and we hid behind the curtain. And one day, I hear this loud, another chicken screaming and flying into the chicken coop, and it's followed by a German Shepherd dog. And I was right outside the curtain, and somehow or other, by some miracle, the officer that he came with, because German officers had trained German Shepherd dogs, the officer wouldn't come into a dirty chicken coop, so he whistled for the dog, and the dog went right back. I was right there, and I remember seeing it. To this day, as old as I am, and I'm a great-grandma at this point, I'm still afraid of German Shepherds, and yet I love pets, and I have a cat, and I've been to Africa to see animals there, but German Shepherds I'm petrified of. Yes?
Tell them why they took you in.
Okay.
Why they took you in.
Why, oh, yeah. There's a wonderful story as to why this woman and her daughter, you have her daughter's picture? Yes, that was her daughter. Her name was Helena Sokalska, and the daughter was Jadwiga, Polish. They were Polish people.
Pushing the photos. I don't want you to push off the stage. She's going to go off the stage.
I'm going off the
Okay,
stage.
there we go.
I didn't realize that this was moving. Anyhow, I didn't know about this story. I found out much later on. I'll tell you when I found that out. But apparently, my father was walking in the street while he was still in the ghetto, and this lady approached him, and she said, "Doctor, my daughter just had a baby, and she's blind. Would you mind coming to look at her and see if there's anything you can do?" Now, you have to realize that there were no antibiotics in those days, and my father probably made a lot of his own medications. And he said, "Okay, I'll come tonight, I'll take a look at her." So he went over there. It was a two-month-old baby girl, and he looked at her eyes, and he put some salve on her eyes, some kind of a cream that he probably made himself. And he said, "I'll be back tomorrow night, I'll check on her." And he went back the next night, and she had opened her eyes. And it was a miracle for the grandmother and the mother that this baby, who they thought was blind, opened her eyes. So the old lady said to him, "Doctor, is there anything I can do for you to thank you for this miracle?" And he said, "Would you be willing to hide my wife and my daughter?" And she said, "Well, I'll have to discuss it with my daughter." And she got in touch with my father the next day, and she said, "We decided we will hide you." Now, you have to understand that her cottage, that little cottage that you saw, was directly across the street from the German headquarters, the Gestapo. Anybody hear of Gestapo or SS? Or, oh, well, you know a lot. You're what, junior high school, middle school? So in 8th and 9th grade, or 7th and 8th? What is it? 7 and 8. Okay, so they're smart kids. They know a lot. I know I taught high school, so that's why I'm talking. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, we were directly across the street from the Gestapo, which was the best place to be, because who would believe that there were Jews hiding right under their noses? And because the daughter was so gorgeous, they would come to the house all the time and bring food and all kinds of stuff. And so would they believe that Jewish people were eating their food that they had donated to the two Polish ladies? Anyway, also, they would talk about the war and what was going on and where the armies were moving. They were fighting the Russians there, by the way. There were no Americans there. There were just Germans and Russians. And that the Russians were moving forward and that they were going to be evacuating. And my father had a map on the wall, and he would listen through the wall. He would listen to the talk, and we knew exactly what was going on because he would mark it on the map as to where the front was moving. Anyway, I should tell you where we slept, which was kind of a fun story in a way. Anyway, at night, we would leave the chicken coop and go into the main house. And the main house, it was just one-room house. It was a huge oven there. It was like a pizza oven that you know with the round opening. And apparently my father had brought in, when he was coming with his medical bag, he would bring in bricks, and he bricked it, closed it off, because there was a space between the ceiling and the oven. He bricked it up, and he put steps in the oven, and that's where we slept. We came in every night, climbed into the oven, took the steps up, and there was a mattress on top of the oven. That's where we slept. Also, I developed a bad cold and I was coughing a lot, and we were sitting in the back, in the chicken coop. So they were afraid that the neighbors would come in and they would hear me coughing, and they would be questioned. So what they decided to do with me is to put me in the main room of the house, put me in the two ladies' bed, because they both slept together, mother and daughter, and I had to stay turned away towards the wall the whole time. And people would come in, neighbors would come in, "Who's this child? Where'd you get her?" And they said it was a cousin that I'd come in from the countryside, and then they were trying to get me better because I was sick. And I never moved. I just stayed turned against the wall. And it turned out okay. I survived there. And on top of that, because I was not allowed to speak loud with my voice, we whispered. I had lost all my voice. I could only whisper. I had no voice. And my father said that because I was a growing child, my vocal cords had atrophied, that eventually they would get back to normal, but took about a year before I got a voice. So, yeah, I'd like some water.
You want some water?
I'm dry. Yeah, have water. You don't mind, do you? Okay, so after about a few weeks, we knew that the Russians were coming back, moving back. And one night, we hear the word, in the garden, we hear the word tovarish. Anybody here knows what that means? Okay, it means comrade. And we knew that it was Russian. So we came out of the hiding, and oh my God, there was hugging and kissing. We were so happy we were liberated. And they knew right away who we were, that we were Jewish people hiding in there. And so what happened was that the Germans started moving back. So we ran with the army, the Russian army. We left with them with the tanks and the horses and the whatever. And this was Poland in March. And Poland has a very, very harsh winter, just the way Russia does. And the snows had just started melting, and the ice, and the roads were not paved, and it was all mud, deep mud. And I remember the Russian tanks and all that, and we're going. And one of my cousins had survived, the one who had lost his parents, the hunchback lady he had survived, and he could show up. So he never let me forget. He was 12 years older than I was, and I was very skinny and small.
I got his picture.
Oh, that's right. My cousin. Well, he looked like that at that time. And anyway, he never let me forget for the rest of his life. He's dead a long time. He was quite a bit older than I was, 12 years older, that he carried me on his back because I was so small that I was falling into the mud and I couldn't get out of it. So anyway, we ran with the Russian army for quite a while. They fed us and took care of us. And then we got back into town because the Germans, they somehow or rather pushed the Germans out of town. And they found a whole group of German officers in the movies because they were not expected back so soon. So the Russians, who don't believe in any kind of good care for their prisoners, the next day, all the prisoners, the German officers, were hanging in the center of town with their uniforms on, and we all went into town and started spitting at them. So that's my memory as a, like, by then I was 6 or 7 years old already. So I remember very clearly. And anyway, we got our house back. We went back into our house. My father was made a major in the Russian army, and he was the head of the polyclinic there. And I went to a Russian school, and I started learning how to read and write in Russian. And I remember wearing a red scarf, which is the color of the Communist Party. And I used to, every morning, we would bow down to Stalin's picture. Anybody know who Stalin was? Yes? Who was it? Oh, I'm not supposed to ask questions. I'm not asking questions. I'm not allowed to ask questions. It's okay, it's okay. Anyway, we had to bow down to Papa Stalin and Papa Lenin, and then we were learning how to read and write in Russian. And because there was an epidemic of lice, all the children had we were 7 years old, heads were shaved. But I had my hair, because I was the only child with hair because my father promised that he would take care of the lice if I ever got them. So all the kids, boys and girls, looked alike. You couldn't tell the difference between a boy and a girl because all their heads were shaved. And so we stayed there for quite a while, and things were pretty good. And, you know, my father practiced medicine. And then one night, in the middle of the night, there's banging on the door, and it's Russian soldiers. And they had heard that the Jews had gold. Where we would have gotten gold at that point, nobody had anything. We had lost everything. But anyway, they started looking through the bricks of butter. Our butter used to come in bricks from the farms. And whatever this, with bayonets, they went through all that, checking looking for gold. The next morning, my father said, "That's it, we're not staying here anymore. We've had enough with the Germans, we're not staying, we're going west." So we abandoned everything again, sat at the train station that was supposed to go west. We didn't know when the train would be leaving, but it was August, it was good weather, so we sat outside waiting till a train showed up going west, and we took that train and ended up many, many days of staying on the train, riding on the train. We ended up in a free Poland because the place where we were was not Poland anymore, it was Russia. And it's Ukraine now, but it was Russia then. So we headed towards free Poland, and it was very nice. It was a city called Bytom, and my father, again, opened up a medical practice there, and my mother started a school for young children, and I went to school. This was my second year of school, and I was Polish. So first I learned Russian and read and write in Russian. Then it was Polish, read and write in Polish. And I went to school, and it was lovely. I had a nice time, but I was not allowed to say that I was Jewish, even though it was after the war. I went to church with my class, and I was not allowed. My teacher knew I was Jewish, but the kids did not know that I was Jewish. And then everything was fine, actually. And my father had his patients coming in there, and his office was right in front of our apartment. It was an apartment house, a low apartment house. And he had a lot of patients at night. My father did all the shots and everything. And the patients had to sleep in the office very often because they were getting shots every 6 hours. And we would have these strangers walking around through our apartment looking for a bathroom. So I remember all these things. Anyway, one day I came back from school. That was about a year later. And my mother had just gone to Warsaw, which was the capital city of Poland. And she had come back. And I was told that we're packing up and we're leaving again and we're going west. So there I am. Then I was 9 years old. We're heading west, back on the train with whatever my parents could put in suitcases, and we're going west. And we ended up in Czechoslovakia. Well, now it's Czech Republic, but it was Czechoslovakia then. And we ended up in a displaced persons camp.
What does that mean?
People without papers, without any kind of driving license or any kind of license. Displaced people. We were just away from wherever we were born or had lived in. And we ended up in this camp, and it was divided for men and women. So I was with my mother, and my father was in a camp nearby. And can I tell them about the bed box? Okay. So we had a light hanging there in this room where we were, my mother and I, and a few other women and children. And we spent the whole night picking off bed bugs off our bodies because it was infested with bed bugs. I'm not asking if they know what it is. Anyhow, to make a long, that's my memory of there. And the other good memory was that my father came every morning and he got me and he took me to Prague, which is the city, the capital city of Czechoslovakia, a beautiful city which was never destroyed by the war. So I went to the zoo and he took me to the museums there and he took me to the castle and I had a wonderful time doing that. And then one day we're told, that's it, we're leaving and we're heading to France. Now, let me just back up a little bit. My mother had six brothers and sisters. She was the youngest of a large family, and they had all been killed by all. Their children, their wives and husbands, they were all killed. She was the only one who survived. And one of her nephews survived. Her oldest nephew, he survived in Russia. He ended up in Israel eventually. He became a judge there. But that's the only member of her family that survived. And my father was a member, also had there were 7 children in the family, but 2 of his sisters survived. And one of them was in the United States, and one of them was in France. And my father found out that his youngest sister, his baby sister, was alive in France. So we made the choice, my father made the choice to go to France. So we took a train and we ended up in Paris, and with my aunt and uncle, and I lived in Paris for 5 years, and of course I learned how to speak French fluently. I finished elementary school in Paris, and I finished 2 years of secondary, lycée, and in 1951 we came to the United States. We got visa. We waited 5 years in Paris to get permission to come to the United States. And my father could not work as a doctor there. They wouldn't allow him. So my mother supported us as a teacher. And we ended up in the United States. And I have to tell you kids that when I saw the Statue of Liberty, I came by ship. And I came into New York. And when I saw the statue, it was early morning. I'm still tearing up about it because it was such a wonderful sight for me to see the Statue of Liberty, that finally, we reached a place where we would be all right. And things were.
And I got a picture of your picture up here. This is one of my favorite pictures of Suzanne.
I was
The
dressed up
princess
for a
outfit on.
costume party as a princess. That was in New York, yes.
That's her mother and
That's
father
my
on the
father,
right.
mother already. My father wearing the doctor's whites. And he was able to take the medical boards in New York, and he was able to practice medicine in New York. And my mother was a teacher. And she worked with children that had well, in those days they called them retarded, but they were just children that had problems learning how to study and read and stuff, and she worked with them. She played the piano beautifully, so she played piano for them, and kindergarten, by the way, she taught young children and made costumes for them. She was just terrific. And both my parents died in the United States. But I have to tell you one thing which is very interesting when I think about it. We never talked about what we went through. Never. We just never talked about it. My parents were busy making new lives here, and I was in school. When I got here, I was 14, and so I was a little bit older than you, and I went into 9th grade here, not speaking any English, but I had a very good background in English grammar. because I had gone to school 2 years in Paris in the secondary school, in lycée, which is high school, and they taught English grammar there. So when I started school in Brooklyn, I went to Brooklyn, New York. When I started school, I got the highest grade in English in that class for the marking period. Can you believe it? I hardly spoke any English, but my grammar was so good that I got the highest grade in the class. And I had a thick French accent, and all the kids called me Frenchie, and they thought I was wonderful because I had that thick accent. So I love this country. That's it. That's about it.
How many languages do you speak?
A lot. I spoke Polish, of course. At home, we spoke Polish. Then I was Russian occupation. Then German. Then, what else did I speak? Oh, French, of course. I'm totally fluent in French. English and Spanish, because I also taught Spanish. I taught French and Spanish in a high school on Long Island. So I get around. I was very good to travel with. My husband, who was an American, who only spoke English, loved traveling with me because I spoke to everybody. I could manage no matter where we were. I could speak their language.
And then we'll do the, so the next part of Suzanne's story transitions. I just want to tell you, since your principal brought it up about being good to one another, the two women who risked their lives to save Suzanne and her family, there's an organization called Yad Vashem, and Yad Vashem, one of the things they do is they recognize non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish victims during the Holocaust. And the recognition is called the Righteous Among the Nations. And Suzanne's going to just kind of like,
Should I tell them
yeah.
about trip to Poland?
yeah, that's right here, we got your picture up.
Oh, great. Okay, and 2015, I was contacted by the Israeli embassy in Warsaw in Poland. I was living in New York at the time. And they asked me if I wanted to meet the descendants of the two women, the son of Yaja, the good-looking lady, and the grandson of the old lady, that they were living in Poland, and that the embassy had been able to contact them. Would I like to be in touch with them? And the thing is, I should say, my father had been in contact with them over the years, but I lost track of it. Anyhow, to make it long, of course, I immediately responded yes. And I heard from them within a week, and we got in touch with each other. And my whole family, now I have 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, not the great-grandchildren, but all the grandchildren, and my son, who lives in LA, and my daughter, who lives in Orlando. We all went to, and my husband, and we all went to Poland to meet the family. And we had a wonderful time. We spent a whole week with them. We traveled together. We rented a van, and we all went all over the place. And we had dinner together. It was just great. And this gentleman here is Max, and he's the grandson of the old lady. He was born after the war. His father had been a pilot in the Polish army, and he was in England, and with the Americans. And he came back, and he was born after the war. And that's me, of course. And this lady's giving me flowers, because I spoke there. I had a translator, because my Polish isn't that great. But I spoke in English, and I had a translator next to me who translated. I spoke to a large group of people. There was the ambassador of the United States. There was the ambassador of Israel there. It was just a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And the flowers we took, those flowers with him, I took with him to his mother's grave, who was the young lady that you saw originally, picture. We went to that grave, and we left the flowers there for her. And we're still in touch with them during the holidays. We are in touch by Facebook and all that. Now it's easy. So we're in touch, and they're a lovely family. And they were honored by the Yad Vashem in Israel, correct. You're gonna show them the museum? Or that's...
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Okay. Anybody know what this is? Oh, I'm not supposed to ask
Yeah, it's
questions. Never mind. Anyway, that's the swastika. That was a Nazi symbol. And Schindler's List was a movie made by Steven Spielberg that talked about this gentleman who was a Nazi, a German Nazi who was in Krakow in Poland, who had a big factory, and he used the factory to hide Jewish people. He gave them jobs and he employed them. He was wonderful. He saved hundreds of Jewish people during the war, and he protected them. And now, when we were in Krakow, my family and I, we went to the factory to see it, and now it's a museum. And the floor, this is the tile floor there, the swastikas, which were put there for the museum, and they weren't there during the, when there was a factory. But that's my daughter, I'll tell the kids, this is my daughter's foot, and I said she should have had a pedicure before she took that picture. Anyway,
So,
yeah.
so right now, I've got this saying, time for questions, but what we're gonna do is we have questions that were posted earlier that I'm gonna ask Suzanne that were from students in some of the classes throughout the district, and then if we have time after that, if there's any time for any other questions, we'll allow it for that. Suzanne, one of the questions I've got on here is, what was the scariest part of your entire experience? Like, at what point in time were you the most afraid?
I can't say because I was scared all the time. I was afraid all the time. It was constant fear. Constant fear when I heard shooting, when I heard trucks coming, when I heard planes flying, everything is afraid. And of course, that dog also scared me, you know, when that dog snuck in. But I was afraid all the time. I can't really pick a specific time.
So after the Holocaust, how did you cope with the trauma of the experience that you survived and witnessed?
Well, I was married very young, and I finished University of Michigan, and I had my son was born there, and everything was fine. I didn't have any trauma memories, but as my children were young, my daughter was born, I developed agoraphobia, which is a fear of open spaces. And it was definitely in connection with what I had gone through. So I went through a period of behavior modification where I was taken by a social worker with a group of other women who had the same problem into the different areas, open spaces that we were afraid of, and that helped me a lot. I still have a slight bit of it, but I'm fine. I can drive, I can go anywhere, so I travel. So I'm okay, but I had to have that help because it was getting so bad that I was afraid to leave my house.
In the way that you were doing well, do you think that you surviving with your parents had
Oh,
something to do with it?
Well, there were several reasons why I was lucky enough to survive. One of them, of course, was the fact that I survived with both parents. There were a lot of children that were orphaned because a lot of the Jewish family had taken their children and put them into families that were willing to take them, and then the parents were killed, and the children just were orphaned. There were a lot of children. I was lucky. I survived with both my parents. So if you have your parents, you always feel, no matter what, they'll take care of you. So that was number one. Number two was the fact that my father was a physician, and he had contacts outside the ghetto, and he was able to make arrangements with many people to help him. So that was number two. And what else? That was the main thing.
Those are your two big ones.
The fact that I survived with both parents, and the fact that my father was able to make contacts with a lot of his patients for help and food and stuff like that. That was a big deal.
So, did you ever, at any point in time, the question is, did you ever feel hopeless? But I was thinking about, even in the travel, that you will ever find a home that you would be able to be in, and you know, that you would ever be home again, that you would ever have a place that you would be, you know.
Only in the United States. That's it. That was the goal. That was the goal, no matter what. Have to get to the United States, legally, of course. And in one of the groups that I spoke to, it was an older group, and one of the young men asked me, why did you come to New York? So I explained to him, like, you had to have what was called then an affidavit. You had to have someone in the country who vouched for you that in case you couldn't make a living or that they would support you. And of course, our affidavit came from the aunt who survived in the United States, and she sent an affidavit to us that she would take care of us if we needed help. And I had another cousin who survived, and he had to go to Reading, Pennsylvania, because he got an affidavit from a cousin in Reading, Pennsylvania. So he raised his family in Reading.
And since your parents were more educated and your father was a doctor, do you think that's why they were treated less, or were they treated any differently or less harshly within the ghetto?
Within
was
the
tra-
ghetto by the Germans or
Yeah,
by?
by the Germans and the people, I guess I would say, everyone.
Well, the ghetto, by the way, every ghetto had what they called a Judenrat, which was a government formed by prominent Jewish people in the ghetto, and they were working with the Germans. And my father was asked to join it, and he absolutely refused, thank God. I don't know if you kids have read Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank. By the way, they were given up to the Germans by the head of the Judenrat where they were, who knew where they were hidden. And he was threatened by the Germans that he better tell them if he knew of any people that were hidden in the area, and he ratted on them, and that's how they were found out. And also, one big and important point was that we were hidden alone. We did not share a hiding place with anybody. Anne Frank, they shared their hiding spot there with another family, and that wasn't good because after a while there were fights and disagreements and all that, and that, of course, we were in such a small place, there was no room for anybody else.
Okay, you're leaving that. But do you think within that, do you think about your father's treatment, was anything else to his treatment? Like, he was allowed to pass in and out of the ghetto, though, because he was a doctor?
He had advantages. We had it because of that, because he was allowed in and out. Not everybody was. My mother wasn't allowed out, but my father, by the way, the Jewish star. We all wore Jewish stars, by the way, including a child like me. We all had to have the Jewish star. So if you've ever seen it in photos, we all had it in the front and the back was the Jewish star sewn onto our clothes.
So the question that's asked is relating to a camp, but you were not in a camp. So while you were in hiding, since all those, the officers were bringing all this food, someone asked, was there a particular favorite food that they brought that you really liked?
Christmas, I remember being there for Christmas, and they brought this huge goose that was stuffed for Christmas, and all kinds of delicious foods, which was amazing. I mean, if they knew that Jews were eating their food, I don't know what they would have done. But, by the way, also, apparently they had, this was found out when I was in Poland with the grandson, that his grandmother had told him that they had been warned by the Gestapo, by the German officers, to be very careful, because apparently there were rumors in town that they were hiding us, and that they had to, and the German officer was the one who warned them, and they had heard from. So what my father did, he wrote 3 letters to prominent people in the town. Again, remember, it was a small town. Prominent people were not Jewish, of course, and wrote the letters. And one of the old ladies, she had another daughter who lived in another town where there was a labor camp, and she came and took the letters, and she mailed those letters from the other town with a postmark from the other town. And my father had written the letters to tell people that we were in that other town, and that we were in the labor camp and everything was fine, and that we were okay. And once the people got the letters from the other town, the rumors stopped that we were hidden in this place. But as I said, my father thought of a lot of important things, and he saved our lives, really.
I think that answers most of the questions that are on here, because just like we mentioned before, the questions about a camp, for those of you who are online who asked the question, Mrs. Schneider was never in a camp per se. She was in a displaced persons camp, these are camps that came up after the war, but they were not the same as being in a camp that was created by the Nazis for the purpose of holding Jews or holding prisoners of war or any other group. This is because many of these people didn't have a home to go back to because they were taken from their countries and they had no citizenship anywhere. They had no place to go. So you went where you were told, or this was the only place you could be. Think of like refugee tent cities that you see on the news and things like that. Very similar. It's just tents and tents and tents, and this is just where people would live until, you know, they could go somewhere or find a place where they would be taken in.
By the way, while I'm at it, I live in a retirement community in Winter Park, Florida, and I met a gentleman there who had been in the American Army. And he was one of, I have to tell you, when we saw American soldiers, it was like the most wonderful thing in the world because they gave us candy and gum and all that stuff. But anyway, he was one of the, he had fought the war in Europe, and he was one of the American soldiers who was sent to those displaced person camps to help people be repatriated and sent to their countries and where they wanted to go. And I met him here in Winter Park, where I live, in the retirement community.
So I think this is about out of time, but I want you guys to know this, especially those of you when you're hearing this story for the first time. Suzanne goes with me everywhere and gives of her time. I want you to think about, you know, when you go home and you've had a bad day or had something go wrong and your parents go, "How was your day?" You probably respond something like, "Fine." You know, who says that when you go home and you've had a bad day, you don't want to talk about it? You know, you don't want to talk about it, but parents want to ask you, imagine talking about the worst event in your life for most of your life, or like the end of your, this talking about this for all this time. Suzanne actually has given talks to schools in the past few weeks to thousands of students and regularly shares her story because she wants you to learn from it. So with that, Ms. Schneider, what would be your message to all of the students who are watching online and in here?
Well, obviously, it's very simple. First of all, be thankful to be in this wonderful country, no matter what the problems are. We have problems, I'll admit. But I have lived here long enough and long that we've had other problems before here, and everything was good, turned out okay. And if you have parents or family, just be thankful to have them, because think about it. I came from a huge family. My mother had 6 brothers and sisters with nephews and nieces, cousins, and so forth. And my father, all his, the ones who were killed were also married with children. And I have no family at all. So be thankful. I have nobody except for my own children. Thank God for them and grandchildren. Just think about how lucky you are to have your family, to be able to have Thanksgiving with them or Christmas or whatever you celebrate, and to be in this wonderful school environment. I never would have been allowed into a school environment like this had I been older during the occupation. So be thankful. And of course, again, I repeat over and over again, when I saw the Statue of Liberty, I still see it again in my eyes, and I'm from New York, so I've been there to the island there and all that, and it is a wonderful country, so be thankful for that.
What are your lessons for the women who weren't Jewish who risked their lives to save you? What can they take from that?
Can you believe, I can't tell them about my cousin?
No, because we're out of time.
Okay.
Last message.
All right,
What can
well, think about the bravery, because those 2 women, with the baby, by the way, would have been shot if they had been, the Germans had been aware of the fact that they were hiding Jewish people right there. They would have been shot. The baby would have been shot. They would have been shot. They took care of us. They fed us. They were there for us. They had the courage to do it. And that's amazing situation, mother and daughter. And the son-in-law, the old lady's son-in-law, as I said, was a pilot flying with the Americans from England to liberate Europe during Normandy D-Day. So,
And real quick, hopefully none of you will ever be in that
No,
situation.
no.
But the message would be that you all can do little things for one another right here in the school, in your
Absolutely.
community, within your families when you can. For those who maybe aren't like you, or when you see things that are happening to people, you know what right and wrong is. You know what things that you can do and what you can't. But again, even small things. It doesn't
Small
have to be. It doesn't always have to be something big. But the behaviors that we see that are exemplified during the Holocaust, the bad behaviors, the things we see, the Nazis were people. The collaborators were people who made decisions.
Yeah.
Make good decisions. Speak out for one another. Even people who are not like you, especially for people who are marginalized and pushed to the side, do what you can. Because, you know, you guys are the next generation and you are what we have. And you have to be good to one another because the people around you, this is your community for the next little bit. And when you go on to your high school, that's your community. These are who are going to be around you. Be there for one another as best you can, when you can. Ms. Schneider, thank you so much.
Thank you.